Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me today is one of my new co-hosts, Bess Goden. Good morning, Bess.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you. And our guest today is Ben Theobald of Chambana DSA and WEFT Radio in Champaign, Illinois. Ben, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell our guests what we're going to be watching in a moment here. We seem to be having some technical difficulties, folks. I'm sorry about that.
Hear us, Ben?
Huh? Sorry?
Hi. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh. Sorry. What a way to start. Hi, my name is Ben Theobald. My pronouns are he, him, if that's needed. And I'm a member of Champagne Chambana DSA, and this was a city council meeting. Now it's been a little over a few weeks ago where we're speaking about ceasefire resolution. I felt the need to talk about this incident that happened in this was a really horrible thing that happened in I believe it was Plainfield, Illinois, where I think it was a Palestinian, a 6-year-old Palestinian boy who was killed. You may have possibly heard about this and made national news. I felt the need to bring that up because of the kind of hate crimes and that have been happening to. Of course, there was that shooting in Vermont, and also. Keep in mind, I will say there's also been a lot of times, with this Israel-Palestinian conflict, stuff happens to Jewish people too, so to remember. And that was brought up before. So this was kind of me. I also just felt the need to bring up, this is what's also happening to Palestinians. I kind of did it in kind of last minute, so when I kind of was very angry and pretty emotional, a little bit emotional about it, because it was such a just such a horrible case that happened with the boy, with what happened there, and because he was stabbed, I believe it was 26 times. By his landlord. His mother was also attacked too.
Yes, she was stabbed too. She just didn't die.
Yeah, and that's just such a. It was, from what I understand, they knew this landlord. They were
attacked by their landlord.
Their landlord.
On top of everything else, you don't just have to worry about being evicted. You also have to worry about your landlord being a racist prick.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and this was a pretty. This was a kind of a heated. I guess it got pretty. Emotions were high during this. These city council meetings. There was also another one this past week that was able to attend to, but and. It always seems like the counter arguments against a ceasefire resolution is that, well, if we stop the bombing, which has killed like 90% of the infrastructure in Gaza has been destroyed. So many of they only have one remaining hospital that's still running. If you've been paying attention to the incredible Palestinian journalist Bazan, I'm pronouncing her name right. I hope I am. Bazan, um, who's been um, been
Underscore Bizan one.
yeah. Who's been doing just absolutely incredible reporting, and I honestly don't know how she's been, but yeah, just the conditions in Gaza are just absolutely dire right now. I mean, it's
worse than dire.
Yeah.
Than dire. It's unimaginable. I mean, that's the best way to put it. And I think that's a good segue. I will start the video, and thanks for the setup, Ben.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Ben Theobald. I live in Urbana now for almost 8 years. On October 14th, just a few hours from here in Plainfield, Illinois.
I'm getting an echo. Can you mute your mic, Ben?
Wadia Al-Fiyum, a 6-year-old Palestinian American boy, was killed when he was stabbed 26 times in Plainfield, Illinois. I'll repeat that again. Wadia Al-Fiyum, a 6-year-old Palestinian American boy, was killed when he was killed 26 times by his landlord because he was a Palestinian. I would like to say in terms of why this issue matters, and as I said, I do support this ceasefire resolution. You're going to hear a lot about this being an election year, that democracy will be on the ballot, and it is. And I would also like to say, since we do live in a democracy, over 80% of Democrats support a ceasefire resolution, and I believe the average overall is about 66% of Americans support a ceasefire resolution. So Nikki Brzezinski, who represents the Illinois 13th Congressional District, which represents Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, has said that Israel, what they are doing is justified. Well, I am sorry, but what is happening in Gaza, the bombing of hospitals, the killing of children, is not justified. And I would just like... And I agree that all the hostages should be released. And if you actually listen to interviews with Israeli hostages, what they feared was not Hamas, was not Palestinians, but the bombs of Israel, of the IDF. And I will also say our governor, J.B. Pritzker, when he comes in here, because he also said that Illinois stands behind Israel. Now, I'm sorry to say, I do not stand behind Israel. I do not stand behind my tax dollars. Billions of United States dollars being used of what is happening in Gaza. It is the most densely populated population on Earth. What many humanitarian UN experts are saying that is a humanitarian disaster. And I will just leave this with a quote by James Baldwin, famous author. Excuse me, sir, I am talking. Every children around the world is ours, everyone around the world. And anyone who fails to see that, I'm afraid, is incapable of seeing humanity. Support the ceasefire resolution. Be on the right side of history.
Hello.
Yes, nicely said.
So that was a little bit, by the way, that person actually was the person. I mean, they actually were support. So yeah, but I was a bit, angsty in there. But
I want to draw attention to something Ben said in the video about Gaza, how densely populated Gaza is, because I don't think people really have an understanding of the space we're talking about when we talk about the number of bombs that Israel has dropped on the Gaza Strip. The whole Gaza Strip, not just the city of Gaza, the whole Gaza Strip is about the same size as Hobart, Tasmania in Australia, which is a town of about 400,000 people. So that's the whole Gaza Strip. And the population of the whole Gaza Strip is 2.2 million.
Isn't it about the size of Manhattan? To give us a closer reference?
Smaller.
It's smaller. Wow. So just for perspective, there's 2.5 million people last count.
Yes. So perspective, it's 2.2 to 2.5 million people in Gaza population-wise. But they're crowded into the same space as all 400,000 people in Hobart, Tasmania.
Wow.
So it's about the size of a typical American or American suburb, if you can picture what I'm talking about. But it's crowded with an urban population.
Yeah.
So that in itself is a war crime. Crowding that many people into that small a space and besieging it is criminal by itself.
Yeah.
And not to mention, like, they don't have access, like most of the people in Gaza, even before all this horror started, they didn't have access to things like clean water, and and now now there's huge famine. There's been in terms of like what Israel is even allowing, because somebody brought up that why UN aren't they allowing aid into Gaza, and it's just like essentially not really in terms of like what they were like in terms of like there were supposed to be trucks with aid coming in, but from what if there were it was very 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 limited, and
they were bombing the trucks.
Essentially, they were bombing the trucks, and the
whole
aid. Oh, go ahead, Bess.
Yeah, no. So I had heard at one point that there were a necessary amount of 200-300 trucks per day of aid that should have been allowed into Gaza. It was ready to go. Okay, these are from humanitarian organizations across the world, and they only let about 20 trucks in per day, and they didn't really check what was in the truck, right? So you actually see videos of kids opening. I saw a video of a kid opening toy plastic food.
You're breaking up there, Bess.
I'm sorry. I might have to locate to a better internet point in the house. But I'm trying to say that they only let in 20 out of like 300 to 400 trucks per day, right?
That's how they do it. The Israelis
they didn't check what's in each truck.
Mm-hmm.
So when they let in like some of the they let in like toys instead of actual food, like they don't check. So they let in COVID tests instead of blankets. Like, it's absolutely insane.
Well, what's gross about letting in the COVID tests is you have to remember that since the pandemic began and the vaccines and treatments have been available, Israel has not been letting vaccines or antivirals get to Gaza very much. That's something you need to think about. Even before Israel started shooting again, they were using COVID as a weapon of war against Gaza.
And literally any basic injury or illness, because the
commission. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I know in the West Bank, like, Palestinians can essentially even generally travel free, but like now essentially just like that in terms of the situation in Gaza, and from understanding that yes, even in the West Bank, you know, Palestinians are just shooting without any, just shooting any Palestinians essentially on site just for, and the number of journalists that have been killed in Gaza, it's like unprecedented, and especially like if you were to compare this to in Ukraine, and of course there's that I'm forgetting. He's kind of become like a huge another journalist. His son, how many? Yeah, he lost his wife and his son, and like he still keeps reporting for like Al Jazeera.
Yeah. He lost his whole family, his son, and then his son, who was and then his cameraman got killed.
Yeah, it's just absolutely like
his son, who was also a reporter, got killed on the job. Yeah.
I mean, it's just absolutely. If this were any other country doing this, I mean, in terms of like, yeah.
They killed more than 80 journalists in a period of about a month. Now, when 10 journalists got killed in Argentina by the pro-U.S. government, they called that the dirty war. Obviously, it's a whole lot worse than that. But what we're looking at is a scale where nobody's killed that many journalists that fast anywhere before, even in places infamous for killing journalists and writers.
Yeah, and let's for minute remember what we're talking about too. I mean, we're only talking about really people who are officially officially journalists, and now regular people are picking up the microphone. Thank God, as you mentioned before. Wizard Bizan is one of them. My friend Khalil is one of them. My friend Ahmed is one of them. They are, they're just, some of these people are just regular people. They were never journalists to begin with, and they just see what's going on around them and they just document it. And it's, it's beautiful that they're doing that, but it's also horrifying they have to, right? I mean, and these people are also being killed, but they're unnumbered. We're not counting them because they never had a journalism degree. So I just want to put that out there too.
Yeah, and I'm in touch with a journalist. Her name is Banan. Some might know her as Sarah Hassan on Twitter. With her report, her work, has been absolutely phenomenal. Again, it's like I don't know how she, how she, has honestly been able to do, because again, this situation. For people like me, I live in the United States. I've never lived in a war zone. I'll probably never ever in my life live in any kind of situation like this ever. So yeah, just to kind of and look, I used to be I've done reporting. I was small midtown newspaper. Never ever did I could have ever imagined being anything like this and what's happening in Gaza. It's the whole joke about being a correspondent is you're not doing your job right if you're not getting shot at. It's just like, that's kind of like the whole I think I don't know if Hemingway said that, Ernest Hemingway said that, but what's happening in Gaza with these, again, it's truly unimaginable. You cannot, from my perspective as an American living in the Midwest, and even from my days of being a reporter, I could never truly comprehend or imagine it. It's truly in a way unimaginable, the horrors that we're seeing. I mean, a doctor had to couldn't give anesthesia to his, I think it was actually his daughter. He had to amputate his daughter's leg and he couldn't give her anesthesia. I mean, it's truly unimaginable, like
I remember
you
that.
know, the horrors that we're seeing, and our country, you know, our country's leaders are just, you know, just not doing, not only, well, they're not only not doing anything, they're supporting essentially this. They're still supporting Israel, and Joe Biden can't even, you know, now he's having, you know, and now we're getting sucked into a conflict with Yemen, where
not sucked
in Yemen, and Biden is saying, you know, this will continue whether or not this, you know, and they're saying, I think somebody from his administration, they say they don't see this being a long-term conflict. But it's just like, well, we can't really trust you on that. I mean, how many times has that been said? Oh, the war in Iraq, remember? That wasn't supposed to last as long as it did, but oh, guess what? It did, and it cost this country trillions of dollars and got us into an economic recession, which, you know, if we get pulled into a Middle Eastern conflict, you know, another Middle Eastern conflict situation that can very well pull us into another horrible economic downturn recession. So,
I mean, you got to understand that when we talk about attacking Yemen, what we're doing is we're opening up a regional war. So Israel is bombing Gaza. Yemen, and I don't care what people want to say about the current government of Yemen, this story is still just too good not to tell this way. The government of Yemen declares war on Israel for what they're doing to Gaza and start shooting drones at them. And nobody gets killed. Basically, all the drones are shot down by U.S. Military in the Red Sea, but everybody's like, "What just happened?" And a few days, and at first it was like the government was making up bullshit because where would Yemen get drones? And then Yemen is all of a sudden, no, we fired it. We were trying to hit an Israeli ship. And then they started taking Israeli ships that were and ships bound for Palestine that were going into the Red Sea, which is why Biden made his big free trade shtick. Even though they've said that they're only going to take Israeli ships and ships bound for ports in Palestine. But no, the whole free trade thing is just too important not to start killing people.
Late stage capitalism, late stage disaster capitalism, whatever you want to call that. We gotta keep our corporations.
The spice must flow.
Apparently,
must flow.
All for the sake of capital, I guess. That's always.
But it's not. Yeah. I mean, we talk about late stage, but this is just a replay of British Empire stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
you look at
that, Chris. I totally agree with that. I think that it, we call it late stage because it feels to us like the ass end of a boom period, which we are. And but that doesn't mean that it's not cyclical, and it hasn't been cyclical throughout history. Like, this is colonialism, pure and simple. This is, what's been happening throughout history. And, I definitely blame capitalism for sure. But I also, I blame us as humans. I mean, it's not unusual for people to dehumanize each other and for people to overlook mass murders for the benefit of their wallets. I mean, that's historically, the only way people get rich, unfortunately.
The thing to remember too is that Israel as a state is convenient because it lets us outsource things that otherwise Western countries would have to take direct responsibility for. Before Israel existed, the British were the ones who were responsible for any large-scale killing of Arabs in Palestine because, the British were in charge. But now the Israelis are in charge, so the British and the Americans aren't responsible for what happens there, or so they tell themselves in the media.
Yeah, I believe there's a speech of Biden saying that if there wasn't an Israel, we would have to create, essentially, create an Israel because we have special interests there, and in the Middle East, because
And you put that into historical context, the way that we created the junta in El Salvador, the way that we created Pinochet in Chile, the way that we created the awful anti-communist government of Guatemala of the 1970s that led to what happened in El Salvador and Nicaragua. Because it's important to remember that the government we put in charge of Guatemala promptly went and overthrew the government of El Salvador to put their friends in charge. And that government of El Salvador was the one who was doing horrible things to its own people that led to refugees in Nicaragua and the whole conflict there that became the Sandinista and Contra struggle, which was really ugly, and the Contras committed a lot of horrible war crimes. And all of this came out of this creation of a friendly U.S. government in Guatemala, and it's the same in Israel.
Oh, sorry, I'm going to say I was waiting into somebody was. Sorry. So I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. But Israel is our Guatemala or our Chile, with this government that essentially does our bidding as far as making sure that microchip prices stay at a reasonable level by selling cheap chips from slave labor in Gaza. Because let's not forget that these work permits that Palestinians have to get out of their home neighborhoods to go work in Israeli-owned factories, they're doing this for big tech. They make the microchips that Rokana's and Zoe Lofgren's constituents use to run all their apps.
Yeah.
The Rokana and Zoe Lofgren are Apple's Congress people is a really good way to think about it. And with stuff like that in mind, it's really important to understand how we profit from that in this country. The Israelis are colonizing the Palestinians, and American business makes money the same way that all the capital in Ukraine practically is Canadian.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that. Heck, it ties into our media. In the 1990s, a company called Toy Biz, which was owned by a billionaire with both Israeli and American citizenship, named Avi Arad, bought Marvel Comics because they wanted to try to use TV shows to do action figures out of Spider-Man and the X-Men, like the big Transformers and G.I. Joe empires of the 80s, where they used comic books and TV shows and toys to all sell each other, basically. And it didn't work out, but what it meant was that you had this huge intellectual property that's suddenly owned by a guy who also spends lots of money on helping the U.S. media be more Israel friendly. And you see the way it affected content after the Disney merger, when all of a sudden you've got friendly CIA agents in Black Panther, and they really play up the military industrial complex origins of Captain Marvel, while completely ignoring the alien spy that she was best friends with, who gave her superpowers, and that she kind of wasn't a good a good soldier in the end.
And isn't there supposed to be another, like an actual, like legit, just an Israeli superhero that Marvel's? I forgot what the.
No, there is. I wouldn't. An actual legit superhero is a tricky way to put it. There is a minor Marvel character called Sabra, who is an Israeli government agent and does superheroish stuff, and who was a minor supporting character who popped up when superheroes went to the Middle East. And for whatever reason, it was decided to add Sabra to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The decision was actually made in like 2020 or 2021, and they announced it at the end of 2023 at something that was planned. Obviously, it wasn't deliberately done the way it was, but they end up announcing that Sabra is joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe while all this genocide is going on. Not a good look.
Yeah.
You really ruined that character introduction.
Well, I know.
And is that the greatest crime of this genocide?
Well, I mean, it's a terrible character. I mean, ruining the introduction of Sabra is probably the best thing that he's ever done. It's the only good thing to come out of his evil.
True.
But it's not worth the price.
No way. I'm sorry. That was a dark joke. I'm sorry, guys.
Yes, no, I know. I every now and then I do have some dark humor. I have to. It's hard not to.
Yeah, in these times, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really. But yes, there's now. Marvel's history of characters in the Middle East is not really great, because around the same time Sabra popped up, a Saudi superhero popped up, the Arabian Night.
Oh.
I kid you not, and dressed like something out of the Arabian Nights, which is just a little. They even get the wrong turban. They give him the big Persian turban and the Arab headdress.
Tell me,
and that's the sort of mistake. That's the sort of mistake that got Sikhs killed during the War on Terror Islamophobia craze, because these big turbans that people saw in comic books are not actually Arab; they're Persian and Indian.
Yeah, was it the first hate crime? Even though after 9/11 there was
there was this explosion of
hate crimes. Yeah, I guess
hate crimes against people who weren't Arab for being Arab. Yeah.
Yeah, just because they had beards and wear turban. That's
even just because they looked dark. A Mexican cab driver in San Diego was the very first hate crime. They pulled him out of his cab, screamed at him that he was Iranian, not understanding that Iranians aren't Arab either, and that he's not even Arab, he's Mexican. But they were screaming at him and calling him slurs and saying he was an Iranian while they were beating him up, and he's a Mexican cab driver. It's bad enough that they're prejudiced, but they're stupid.
Yeah.
Racism and stupidity generally do go hand in hand.
I mean, that just shows you that, this all is about white supremacy.
Well, and that is a big part of it too. Yes. Look at the way people talked. The very first Zionists wrote these very self-aware tracts that they didn't want to be guilty of colonial atrocities, and so they thought that the British or the Ottomans should just very kindly relocate all the Arabs in Palestine somewhere else. And you hear that now when you hear people complain about Egypt and Jordan not taking care of refugees.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that people shouldn't take care of refugees, but when you're accusing Israel and Jordan of not doing more Egypt and Jordan of not doing more for refugees, you're saying that the Palestinians can't go home and need to be somewhere else.
Yeah, that's called ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
I mean, you're removing them from their indigenous place, because before Palestinians have been there in such in fact before Israel, if you look at a map, it used to just all be called Palestine. If you look at a map, it all used to be called all used to be called Palestine.
One of the best jokes about the occupation is the city of Haifa. Now, before Zionism, before settling in Palestine by Europeans, the city of Haifa was called Jaffa. In the Bible, Jaffa is not one of the towns that the Israelites take over. Jaffa is a Philistine town. So in the Bible, Jaffa is not part of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. In the Bible, Jaffa is outside of the Holy Land. However, Jaffa was where Jaffa was one of the places where a lot of refugees from Jerusalem resettled within Syria, Palestina, after they were expelled from their homes in Jerusalem after the first Roman Jewish war. So Jaffa became Haifa during the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple and the First Crusade. The Jewish population of Haifa was then wiped out by European crusaders during the First Crusade. So they were killed by the French and the English and the Germans. And then after this, Haifa was resettled by a mostly Arab population and was a mostly Arab city for many, many years, well into the Ottoman Empire. In 1900, in 1920, no, I'm getting my dates wrong, sorry. In 1900, Jaffa had less than 15,000 people who were all Arab and split up fairly evenly between and proportionately as far as the population there went between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. But they were all Arabs, their families had all been living there for years and years and years. In 1921, the population had gone up to about 20,000, of whom about 5,000 were European settlers from Poland and Russia. By 1948, after the war, Haifa had a population of 100,000 people and was 96% European settled. So the ethnic cleansing of the city of Haifa happened between 1920 and 1948, before what we think of as the occupation of Palestine.
So they literally just handed off a piece of land that was like, okay, well, we already cleansed this land, so you can have that.
Well, no, it was a matter of they just kept it, and it was already theirs when they declared independence, and they just sort of pushed everyone else out by the expansion of communities, gentrifying, if you like. Right. Haifa was gentrified by settlers.
Mm-hmm. That's disgusting.
But yeah, no, this is what was going on during the period of peaceful Zionism.
Right.
That's the historical framework we have to keep in mind. The ethnic cleansing started during the peaceful settlement.
Yeah. I mean, and if you think about it, that's what's going on today here also, right? The gentrification in urban areas of neighborhoods that used to be ethnic or poor, and they're pushing them out, And that's, I mean, it's not absolutely not the same situation, of course. But it is the same tactic.
The amount of actual physical violence is not the same, but the process is the same. And the potential for the same violence is there in the process all the time. It's just a matter of degree.
What's one more compared to the Native Americans in terms of like when we kept pushing them out further and further, and in terms of
and making deals that say this is your land, but then illegal settlers move on to that land.
So that's always kind of been such a comparison in terms of like
let's remember that's how the U.S. happened. One of the grievances against the British government in the Declaration of Independence was that the British kept the Ohio Valley closed off for indigenous people, and the U.S. and the colonies wanted to settle Ohio and grow and turn it into farmland. And ultimately, they were angry. One of the big reasons Jefferson became president is that they were angry at Washington and Adams for not opening up Ohio fast enough.
Give me that land. Give me it.
Yes. No, and it's really important to understand too that the way before the Homestead Act and the free land of the 1860s and the post-Civil War period, all this land was surveyed by the government and auctioned off to real estate developers who then got rich building stuff and selling it. I'll be right back. My cat needs to go out.
And our Supreme Court, I believe, has said that the Navajos do not have the right to water. So much like how the Israelis deny Palestinians water, I guess you could say again they kind of take it from America in terms of how they commit mass genocide, mass just the denial, violation of human rights, living with any dignity from their father, the United States of America, against indigenous people. It's just a mirror image of where I guess you could say where they get it from in terms of. And we're always there to defend them because there are essentially, I don't know if I exactly call Israel the 51st state, but I mean they essentially are if not a.
It's definitely it's the only country in the world where you can become a dual citizen without where you can become a citizen of that country without giving up your U.S. citizenship. Other dual citizenship only works the other way. Another country can decide to let you keep your citizenship if you become a U.S. citizen, but if a U.S. citizen becomes a citizen of Ireland, they have to give up their American citizenship. By the way, U.S. citizens can become citizens of Ireland if they're Irish enough because Ireland has a right of return.
Well, what about Italy? I have a friend who applied for dual citizenship of Italy. She had her American citizenship.
No, if you are considered a born citizen, then that's different.
Grandfather.
If you go through a naturalization process, you're supposed to give up your original U.S. citizenship.
Oh, okay.
But with the exception of Israel.
Gotcha.
Now, the reason for that is so we can cooperate militarily. It's not any big conspiracy. It's like the right wing will try to give you the bullshit ZOG conspiracy crap from the 90s all over again in new language. But there's no conspiracy about it. It's the fact that it makes military cooperation more convenient. The first general of the Haganah was an American, but he had to illegally leave the country and pretend to sneak out and pretend to be there as a private citizen because the U.S. couldn't just officially back them in those days. But now you can be a reserve whatever in the IDF and Secretary of State of the United States.
Hmm.
And it's just because it makes that military cooperation easier. It's got nothing to do with the conspiracy crap.
Well, so maybe I'm spouting some of the conspiracy crap without realizing it. So if I am, please correct me. But I do believe that a lot of the reason for that too is business interests, and there are people, living here and living there, sort of part time for business reasons.
Well, and that is not. I mean, that's true. That's how colonialism works.
Right.
A lot of settlers are Americans. Dirty secret that isn't covered enough.
Yeah, it's true.
The two countries that send the most people to Israel every year are the United States and Russia.
It's true, because we have a lot of people here who are indoctrinated with the idea that Zionism means it's a part of Judaism.
Well,
that's how they experience Judaism, and then they're sent on birthright trips over there and put through all the propaganda and everything. And it's because the major moguls who are controlling these things are based here, and they have centers of power here as well as in Israel. So
I mean, real estate developers. What did Donald Trump do for a living again?
Real estate
and he immediately cooperated with Netanyahu to make Jerusalem the capital, which was a huge provocation and escalation that Biden criticized at the time, though Biden hasn't done anything about it.
No, they kept the embassy and the U.S. embassy just said, no, we'll just keep it there. It's fine.
Yeah, and Biden was hugging all over Netanyahu like Netanyahu was his political ally and not Trump's, which what I don't understand. I mean, I understand Biden. It's not that I don't understand Biden. Biden is doing what he's doing because he is absolutely committed to a set of 1970s late Cold War security policies in his head that he's never departed from once in his entire life. But at the same time, I just can't imagine how a guy who's supposed to be a professional politician can cling to his political enemy as closely as Joe Biden clings to Benjamin Netanyahu, despite the fact it not being good for him.
Yep.
I mean, what's kind of crazy is that Joe Biden's to the right of essentially even Ronald Reagan, who
Joe Biden pushed Reagan to be tougher on crime. Also, and most people do not realize this when they talk about saving our democracy by voting, who wrote the original model for what became the Patriot Act at the request of Bill Clinton? Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
Man.
So it's not like Joe Biden has a great investment in protecting our democracy from the President of the United States.
Never.
He just doesn't want the President of the United States to be Trump.
Yep. And that's becoming more and more clear as these things go on. I actually just saw, not to sidetrack, a TikTok where somebody, I don't know if you've heard of this person, their name is Crutches and Spice. She's absolutely awesome. She's a disabled activist, on TikTok. And he was pointing out that there is absolutely no policy information listed on Joe Biden's website. There's not even a link for it.
True.
But they also have 1 million job positions that are open, but none of them are filled. And it seems like there's only a handful of people actually working on the campaign.
Yep.
So, like, where's this money going? Right into their pocket. Somebody is planning his retirement.
So the way politics works now, and one of the few good things I can say about the West Wing is that they actually exposed how this part of politics works in a blatant way that I don't think enough people were paying attention to at the time. But
Yeah.
the biggest political expenses are on these political consultants who are total mercenaries, work for the highest bidder, whoever pays them, regardless of party, are Republicans in their thinking, and whose only purpose is to make money off elections and keep the same sort of beltway, center-right, Democrat/Republican of the Joe Lieberman, John McCain mold in office.
Well, to kind of like bounce on that, so today's actually I believe today's the anniversary of the death of. I just have to get a Lenin reference since today's actually the death of Lenin. And if you haven't read his book, but Lenin kind of talked about how on the how the ruling class about people using positions of power to get power in the company and jobs, and so like what's the kind of example of that in today in America? That would be like lobbying, the revolving door of Washington. So Lenin kind of talked about the bourgeois with democracy, class interests, the higher class interests, bourgeois, their interests will always remain in power, and they get to decide which ruling class gets to crush the majority. So there you go. It's just the kind of the revolving.
If you're the dictatorship of capital has all the forms of democracy, but ultimately you're choosing between capital's two guys.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say it's not even just not having a third party, because if you look at Canada, their third party, the National Democratic Party, has been totally taken over by the Liberals in some of the worst ways. It's abandoned its positions on things like Ukraine and Palestine in ways that have really hurt them, with actual people who want to see change in Canada. And it's this, and it's the UK, and it's not just a third party. It's the fact that once you have power in the ruling class system, you are now exposed to the attitudes and prejudices of the ruling class, and that influences your decision making, because almost everyone you work with has those same ruling class attitudes, and the culture changes you. This is why people complain about the Squad so much, because they have had to make more and more cultural accommodations to the Democratic Party to politically survive.
Mm-hmm.
You can say they're doing what they need to do to still be able to talk about a ceasefire if you want, and you can criticize it, and you can be right on both points. But that's what the dictatorship of capital does.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, it pressures you, right? I mean, even on a daily job level, for example, like if you go into work,
what best example?
I was that are against what your boss's beliefs are. That's your job. That's right.
I was talking before we came on the air, not being able to participate in the strike for Palestine, right, for reasons of economics, and that's something that I need to be able to take those risks at some point if I want to keep going, and at the same time, I need to be able to be afford to get the message out there, and that requires the day job. It's very frustrating.
Yeah,
there are all these traps.
I'd like to comment on that if you don't mind, because we have been talking about this in some of my pro-Palestinian spaces. One of which I do with Christina Mira Khalil, who I'm working on her senatorial campaign for the Green Party in New Jersey. And she is a social worker. We talked about sort of survivor's guilt, and we sort of talked about, how, it feels, we see the suffering all around us, right? We see poor people, we see the people in Gaza, we see all of the suffering. And we feel like there's no other way to sort of fight it than to become part of that suffering, right? But that's not the way to free people. Like if you ask poor people, you ask me because I'm living under the poverty line right now, very low under the poverty line, and your suffering actually does not benefit me, right? So, the idea that you would have to give up your job or give up even, like any kind of benefits that you might have been losing because you took a week off or whatever. That's it. It's important for these actions to go on, and for the people who are able to do it, that's wonderful. But if you can't do it, then your position, in this game is going to be different, and that's okay. Because you are having these podcasts and you are enlightening people with your knowledge of the past of the entire situation. We're all talking about it. Ben, you spoke so eloquently at that town hall. I mean, everybody has a different role in this fight. And I think that it's really important to remember that even people who are so busy providing for their family on a daily basis, like you are doing what's important to keep your own survival and your own family's survival going so that you can continue the fight in your own way. And I think that everybody should take that into account and tell themselves not to waste time feeling guilty if they can't do more or differently, because we all have to fight in our own way.
I'm breaking up a bit again.
So, I think it's important to appreciate what we can do.
No, I think that's right, and I do think that we do have to be at some point, if we're able to. We do need to be able to put our economic interests secondary to our long-term interests to be able to strike, because ultimately that's what we've got.
Yeah. Here's the problem with that. We literally can't at some point, like there are people that can do that, but that they can only do it for a certain level of time. And once you get to a certain point of poverty,
you need mutual aid to support it. That's the whole thing, is you can't just say, let's do a general strike. A general strike requires, one, a mutual aid organization so that people can afford not to work, and two, a self-defense organization so that people not working are not just killed.
Absolutely. Yes, there needs to be a much more present network in place for people to be able to sort of drop out of the economic power play.
Yes. Well, ultimately, divestment, dropping out, is what you have to do, but it can't just be like 60s counterculture dropping out. It has to be organized and meaningful dropping.
Yeah, but like Timothy Leary, man. No, I'm sorry. He told me to turn off the TV and take acid. What?
So number one, I'm not going to bash Timothy Leary. No. There are some things Timothy Leary said that are tremendously true. I'm just saying that, you have to organize dropping out. It's not counterculture isn't enough. It has to be an organized counterculture with volition and purpose.
Absolutely. And different people are doing it in different ways also. I mean, it's important to note that there are some people who are, moving their life off the grid. They are, supporting themselves in different ways that from the traditional. There are people that are trying to sort of do this on an individual level.
Yes.
But as a society, for sure, as a societal level, because, well, here's my thing. I think that the more people who do this on an individual level, the more chance there is for a network to grow outside of this, right? So I do think that both of these things are important for sure. And I definitely think that mutual aid is pretty much the most important thing you could do, even, in lieu of a general strike. I mean, general strike is going to take a long time to organize, but mutual aid doesn't. Mutual aid can happen right now. You can save people right now. I mean, at the end of the day, we can sit here and have a million ideological conversations, but there still be people living under tunnels in the street and starving. And the best thing we could do for people is to take care of them when we can. So, I support mutual aid for sure. I wasn't trying to knock that.
Oh, before I forget, because I see we've passed the hour mark, but I also want to remember to bring up everything that I was thinking of bringing up. Ben and I first met and first started interacting as a result of activism in central Illinois to help keep people's power on during what was then the worst part of the COVID pandemic. As of last week, we are now in the second worst surge of the ongoing COVID pandemic. And I was just wondering, how are things going in Illinois on the COVID front these days?
Yeah, that's kind of what we've been trying to figure out because, as you said, we're in this is the second worst spike. I finally just got my most recent COVID booster shot because I was just trying to figure out, like, I haven't gotten one of the, over a year since I got my last one, and trying to figure out, like, okay, am I, for these, and that's kind of something we, I've been trying to make, in terms of, like, about mutual aid. I'm actually my radio. I do volunteer radio station. I've been doing that for about 5 years. It's actually kind of how I started with the whole it was called No Ambulance Shutoffs.
Yes.
My former coach Alan, we're kind of here at the CETA DSA. We kind of started, reaching out, like, when that whole thing started, because people were getting notices, right when COVID pandemic was starting, about their, because you weren't, nobody could work, or a lot of people weren't able to work because there was a pandemic going on, and so many people lived paycheck to paycheck, and so that whole thing kind of started with we all. I think it was the Illinois Commission that kind of the ICC that, and then they kind of threw the ball to, like, J.B. Pritzker, the governor, in terms of who has the power to enact a moratorium on utilities.
He lied about his own power so that people wouldn't push him to do something.
And the media actually said, no, that's wrong. Actually, because Kentucky and New Jersey were able to do it.
The Intercept ran an article on Pritzker lying about it.
Yeah. I think Alan was. I know Alan was. My coach Alan was. Featured that.
I had Alan on as much as possible in those days.
Yeah, we. I think we want, like, just to kind of, like, remember the good because that was a few years ago. I believe we won about over. From what I understand, like, over $115 million in automatically dispersed utility assistance. And I know in 2022, the No Ambulance Shutoffs campaign won another $80 million in automatically dispersed utility assistance. And I think we actually in 2021 we during the spring there was a spring. I know it was like 3 years ago. It's kind of hard to remember, because that's just how time is now. It just
Yeah.
2021 we during the spring COVID surge we won about 1.1 billion in rental assistance, $400 million in mortgage assistance, and 115 million dollars in IMF and dispersed utility assistance. And there are programs and services available now. I don't know if that now with in terms of like rental assistance, if that can be automatically dispersed. I think you do have to go through like an application, an application process, which is a bit.
Anything you have to apply for, they're hoping that a certain number of people just won't do it because they don't want to bother to apply.
Well, yeah, and it's time consuming. If you have a job, you have a family, that it can be very time consuming. But
even beyond how much time it consumes, you have to work to make the time, and working to make the time can be time consuming in itself.
Yeah, definitely.
And people also, as I remember too. And by the way, let me first say that you guys did amazing work. That's awesome, and I'm glad that you shared that. That's absolutely the kind of work that we all need to be doing on a daily basis for each other, for sure. So we're on for that. But yeah, I remember here in New Jersey, it was very difficult for people who'd already applied because they're on a waiting list so long that they never were gotten to. And then around and they did the same thing again. And they did the same thing again. I think I tried 1 year myself and then gave up. So,
right. all these means testing processes are designed to get people to not go through it, to give up, to stop trying, because that's one way that they control costs.
Yep.
Of course, it costs more to screen people out than it does to actually just help everybody, but they ignore that fact and keep talking about controlling costs.
It's the more I research, kind of like cults and fascism and dictatorships, like the more I realize that the disparity in people's affluence, the disparity in class, all of those things exist not because they have to, but because they have people in power, right? It doesn't matter that the majority of people can't feed themselves if those people are in power.
Well, I mean, look at healthcare, look at genocide in Palestine.
Right.
I mean, look at Donald Trump. So, I mean, all these things. 58% of Americans say they don't want to vote for a president who's been convicted of a felony.
Yeah.
But, Donald Trump is winning the Republican primary all the same.
And Biden's approval ratings are as low. Nobody with Biden's current approval rating
are terrible. Americans want more student debt relief, want more government health care, and don't want to pay so much to fight America's enemies in Palestine and Ukraine.
Yep.
Yeah.
They certainly don't want to get drafted.
Well, and that's the thing, is that you're going to keep hearing people talking about a draft, but the last thing that the people in power really want right now is a draft. An imperial military works best if it's a volunteer military. The British military was a volunteer military entirely until World War I.
Why do you say that? Just because people are more willing to fight?
Because it's easier for the population to support the empire if the population is not directly involved in the atrocities of empire unless they choose to be.
Got it.
So like, if every American doesn't go to the Middle East and kill brown people, then every American doesn't necessarily feel guilty because we're sending people to the Middle East to kill brown people. Mm-hmm. They're all volunteer.
Right.
It's like Vietnam, one of the fundamental problems was the political sustainability of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get rid of wars after Vietnam. We got rid of the draft.
Yeah.
Notice?
Yeah. That's an excellent point.
And it's like, well, I'm not sending anyone no one in my family, not my son, whoever is not getting drafted. So it's like there's no really no inclination to. Americans, hard for anyone to really pay attention for whatever reasons. People are either too busy or just in their own echo chamber. That's the thing with now with despite having access to all this information, everyone kind of goes into their own kind of secluded chamber, and is just in their own space. Despite us being able to be connected, we can see. We now are seeing all the horrors in Gaza. In what's happening to Palestine. But in terms of if there was a draft, I think that would definitely not be something you want, because that's why the Vietnam War was
no draft riots.
Yeah, no draft.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you guys brought that up, because it really does. It puts the American people in the way of a conflict that they wouldn't otherwise be in.
And this is why people could be opposed to things that Reagan and Clinton were doing, or be opposed to the first Gulf War, but the Gulf War happened anyway. Mm-hmm. And then you saw after September 11th, you really saw how really quickly you could turn all that around and just make everybody pro-war with the right news coverage of something bad happening.
Yeah.
You can see the way that the Israeli media has tried to spin October the 7th as
that's essentially
11th atrocity.
Right.
And kind of similar, because they were Egypt notified. It was essentially an intelligence report that Netanyahu more than likely figured, well, I'm going to use, if they're going to, Hamas is a plus for Netanyahu, because it gives him a reason to stay in power, because it's just, you need me to take care of Hamas. And by the way, if you look at who's been funding Hamas, a lot of financial to keep Hamas afloat has been coming from Israel.
Well, all the official funding for Hamas comes from a charity in Qatar.
Qatar. Yeah.
Now, this is one of the reasons that the U.S. gave for backing the Saudi and UAE blockade of Qatar back in the day. That they fund terrorists, specifically meaning Hamas. But yes, there have been news reports that a significant amount of the money that went to that charity was coming from Israeli sources that were friendly to Netanyahu, as a way of propping Hamas up in order to make Netanyahu and politicians with Netanyahu's attitude more successful. It's why Netanyahu's made all these deals with people even further to the right than Naftali Bennett. Now, this is the scary thing that everyone should remember. Number one, Netanyahu is pretty dang right-wing in the first place. Second, Naftali Bennett, whose parents were some of those Americans we were talking about who go to Israel and throw Palestinians off their land. His parents were Americans, but he's a first-generation Israeli. Naftali Bennett is to the right of Netanyahu on these questions of genocide, which means in order to get back into power and shore up his own political positions, Netanyahu had to go out even further onto the fringe right to find people like this Ben Gvir guy who keeps saying the worst possible things, all of which, by the way, are perfectly normal things that people say in Israel. When people deny that they are mainstream, they are forgetting the fact that people say this stuff every day in Israeli media.
Yep.
And the Israelis are bombarded with it the same way that people were bombarded with Rush Limbaugh in the 90s. So you can't talk about it not being mainstream. It's mainstreamed. It's deliberately mainstreamed in Israel the same way that all this awful right-wing stuff is deliberately mainstreamed here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And Ben, do you have any final thoughts before I wrap us up?
I mean, yeah, it's obviously, I think in terms of what can people do, and as I think as Bazan did say, just keep doing what you can to the point of, whether it's going out to protests, I think try to be, because here in Illinois 13th, the problem with our congressperson that I mentioned, Nikki Brzezinski, the problem is she doesn't have a primary opponent, so there's no reason for her to be pressured to do anything, essentially. So I think in terms of
covering some central Illinois primaries too, and I remember the right wing Democrats seemed kind of violent, and I might be scared to primary some of those folks, seeing how they treat people. I have to admit it.
Yeah, and so I guess in terms of trying to be strategic, or of what you can do, in terms of I would just say, just do what you can in terms of of what your limits are, and if that's giving to some mutual aid to some Palestinian groups, I try to retweet again Sarah Hassan 94 the count, I usually retweet her a lot. She in terms of I don't know what her situation is. I know she was trying to see if she could escape into Egypt, but that is a very difficult process. It's just, I would just say, just do what you can and what your limits are. I know sometimes a lot of Palestinians, especially Palestinian students, in the University of Illinois Chicago, have been getting harassed and sometimes even doxxed. The situation is very, this is a very, this is kind of almost McCarthyism type.
There's that doxing van going around from StopAntisemitism.com.
Yeah, that, and just, so my situation is, do what you can in terms of what you think you're able to do. If it's going to protests, going to rallies, sharing as much information, sharing as much, if there's people who are saying, go to this rally, if people are getting, if people are I think it was an event in Chicago where people might get arrested, and so people were calling them, demanding them to release, at a rally for Palestine. If you see kind of my advice would be do whatever you can, even if it means you can't financially or physically be able to, because look, everyone, we're over 100 days into this, and it just seems like you know, you know, you know,
It's obvious Netanyahu wants it to go on for as long as possible.
Yeah.
It's obvious that the Israeli right in general sees this as a huge opportunity to quote unquote finish the job in Gaza. There are real estate companies. We talked about real estate developers before. There are real estate companies advertising seaside homes for illegal settlers already.
Mm.
So yes, it's definitely worth keeping in mind that anything that can be done to keep what's happening at the center of attention.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's not the only one. I want to go ahead and also say we've got the RSF committing a genocide in Sudan, and they're doing it with help from Mossad and the IDF. That must be mentioned. So it's not just that when people tell you, well, the genocide in Palestine is distracting a lot of energy from the genocide in Sudan. Let them know these genocides are interconnected through the beauty of capitalism.
Yeah.
There is also Congo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And let's remember that what's going on in Congo is connected to lithium and green capitalism and the U.S. switching over to electric cars. And so Congo is the new Iraq. So there's all of this stuff going on right now. All of it is linked. The Israeli government has sold oil leases offshore from the Gaza Strip to American and European companies. We're in a world where everybody is looking to make money off of everything, and the horrific occupation of Palestine and siege of Gaza is part of this big series of atrocities all over the world that has been going on for most of my lifetime.
Yeah. I
cannot remember a time during my lifetime when something wasn't happening somewhere.
Yep.
And we have to be aware and outspoken. We have to be willing to support groups fighting against the system for their liberation, and we have to look for ways to bring people together against the common enemy while understanding that the Nazis are the foot soldiers for that common enemy and not potential allies.
And on that note, I would also like to add that this is a perfect opportunity to say the word "stay woke," motherfuckers.
That's actually a good point. And
because literally, stay woke means do not look away. Do not look away at somebody else's suffering. And that's exactly what the anti-woke people are trying to make you do.
So here's my final thought for the day, and it just shows me how media lives in the present and erases history.
Mm-hmm.
Today, on the normal Sunday morning news shows that I give people an alternative to here, they were talking a lot about how the far right attacks wokeness but can't define it. And in their attempt to correctly define wokeness, they pointed out that wokeness began in the black community, and then said that the phrase woke became part of the larger American culture in 2014 because of the whole thing in Ferguson.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking to myself, really?
So that's when you guys found out about it. Okay, gotcha.
So that's my final thought for the day, just to so that you can all think about how short the collective memory of our mainstream media really is, and why I try to give people an alternative. And on that note, thank you, Bess, for co-hosting this week. Thank you, Ben, for appearing. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And I'll tweet at you. You have a great Sunday.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.